placing a new order, ladies and gentlemen, for euro. I'm placing an order to sell short at 118244. Put a place to sell short at 118224. Okay, position opened at 118244. Okay.
We're going to talk with Stephen Barrow, Standard Advisory Head of G10 Strategy. That's at 10 a.m. New York time, 3 p.m. in London, of course, 4 p.m. in Berlin. On a day when we're seeing stocks rise, you know, after the slump that we saw Thursday and Friday, we're seeing green arrows across European stocks today, but U.S. markets are, of course, closed for the Labor Day holiday. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Best, your weekly review of the most important business news, analysis, and interviews from Bloomberg Television around the world.
Ken Burns, welcome to Bloomberg Big Decisions.
We have always been a mixture of things. We are always stronger for that mixture.
Growth is a way to stay competitive, delight more and more consumers.
Welcome to the Best of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang.
They've moved the needle by acknowledging that they have to monitor the content.
What is one word of advice you'll take with you?
Learn how to listen. And that is certainly something that has served me well.
Ankiti, where do you go from here? It's a huge market. It's a huge opportunity. I want to go 100x from here.
Our philosophy is to partner where we can and stand apart when we should.
When everything around us, including the way we work and live, has been interrupted, uninterrupted service is peace of mind. Kenny from customer support is responding to a 500% increase in daily call volume, no matter what. We keep on, so you can keep on.
The rapidity with which we are moving relates more to technological advances in how you can make a vaccine even before you start testing it, that makes me confident that we are going to do everything we can to determine safety.
We've put ourselves on the front foot again by adapting all the company, by resizing, by adjusting production rates, by adapting the supply chain as well to this new difficult environment.
Give you a sense of the real-time action, the 10-year yield tumbling now 11 basis points, so continuing in this knee-jerk risk-off feel.
It's time for the Bloomberg Business Flash, a look at some of the biggest business stories in the news right now. I'm Leanne Gerrans. A big victory for Samsung. It's won a $6.6 billion order to provide fifth-generation wireless solutions to Verizon in the US. It's one of Samsung's biggest 5G contracts ever. The Korean company has been pushing hard to compete with global players like Nokia and Ericsson in providing telecom equipment. Now, shares of SoftBank fell over in Tokyo. There were reports that the Japanese conglomerate made substantial bets on technology stocks using equity derivatives. That's led to concerns that SoftBank's billionaire founder Masayoshi Son is engaging in risky behavior that could now lead to big losses. The CEO of France's Suez has rebuffed a takeover approach by Veolia. Bertrand Camus says the bid undervalues his company and could run into antitrust obstacles. Veolia has offered to buy a 30% stake in Suez. It's the first step towards a full takeover to create a water and waste management giant. And that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Matt.
Leanne, thanks very much for that. Leanne Gerrans there with your Business Flash. Now let's talk a little bit about COVID and the ramifications. India has surpassed Brazil as the country with the second most coronavirus cases in the world. The nation's infections are rising at a record pace of more than 90,000 a day. The U.S., which is the world leader in COVID cases, India and Brazil account for more than half of all cases. Joining us now is Sam Fazeli, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Pharmaceutical Analyst. Sam, it's not surprising that countries like India or the U.S. have a ton of cases. They have a ton of people, although India has way more people than America does. Are we going to see it surpass the U.S. quickly?
Well, and hi, Matt, hope as well. Obviously, if you look at the trajectory and you keep plotting that in a straight line, then yes, it's very possible that it will do. And then, of course, you have to think about how do you compare the number of tests that are being done in each area versus the other territory. I mean, frankly, you look across the United States, you've got a range going from about half a test per 1,000 population in some states to about 8 tests per 1,000 of population in some states. So even there's massive diversity. So there's certainly a possibility that if they carry on the current trajectory, they will surpass.
What do they need to do to put a stop to it? I mean, is it just lockdown, masks, distancing? I mean, is there anything more that we've gotten over the past, what is it now, 6 months? To put an end to this kind of spread?
Yeah, well, our measures are the same. Nothing's changed there. You know, mask up, wash your hands, and try and social distance. The problem is, even when you look at the states, you find that in areas which have slightly lower economic, let's put it this way, the lower income areas where people are more likely to be in cramped accommodation, closer accommodation, the rates of the infection are higher, which is not a surprise because that means it's more difficult for people to keep social distancing. Now you take that to India, where you know there's already a massive density of population, and you take it to the less privileged areas of India, and you find, of course, that you've got that risk. And then it's not just about social distancing. You've also got data that's coming through that suggests that you can pass it through, even potentially in high-rises, through the toilet flushing system. There's a risk that aerosolized virus gets out. So you put all that together, it doesn't add up to, you know, social housing, high-rises, the high density. You're going to keep getting higher rates of infection.
A vaccine would be great, Sam. I mean, before we even get into the complicated discussion of whether or not the public would accept it and take it, are we seeing anybody make real headway towards one that works?
Yeah. I mean, the one that works is a question I can't answer yet. We know that every single one that's reported data, certainly the ones from the big pharma companies, seem to suggest that they at least activate your immune system. Whether it's protective or not is what we do the phase 3s for. So when you look at the trials that are ongoing, you know, the best transparency comes from Pfizer. They have given us 4 different data points so far with regards to enrollment in their trial, and their phase 3 as of September 5th was at 25,000 subjects recruited. That means that trial is possible if you wanted to wait for the full number to recruit, that you could start having data from about the second week of October. A lot of caveats there, though.
Yeah, a lot of caveats indeed. Sam, thanks so much for joining us today. Sam Fazeli there from Bloomberg Intelligence talking to us about the developments surrounding the coronavirus. Let's get over to Bloomberg's Danny Berger right now. She's got a market check. Danny?
Matt, we're seeing this really big divergence between U.S. futures and European equities. The U.S. cash market is closed today, so volumes are lower, not as many U.S. traders online. But still, I think it's really notable. We have very broad gains in the European index, down up nearly 1.5% rather. And really, we're seeing most regions, most sectors driving those gains higher, and some more of the high beta ones as well, like autos and real estate. And part of the reason it also might be rallying is because we don't have tech weighing down on it. And you can see what that weight has done when you look at the difference between NASDAQ and S&P 500 futures. S&P 500 futures really barely changed at this point. They were negative earlier in the day, whereas NASDAQ futures are down by more than 0.5%. It was down nearly 1% earlier, so paired some of those losses. But still, some of the concerns over the froth in the market, the sell-off in tech we've seen over the past couple days, still lingering over the Labor Day holiday. Now, if we switch up the board and look at what currencies are doing, we're looking at sterling declining against the dollar for its 4th consecutive day, trading at 1.31. This is going to be its longest streak of decline since June. Concern over a building of no-deal Brexit rhetoric. Johnson saying that he won't compromise on what he sees key issues in the negotiations. Dollar a little bit strengthier today, so we're looking at the euro falling against it. All eyes are on that ECB meeting that's coming Thursday, where the bank is unlikely to change its policy. Finally, we're looking at crude moving lower by 1.5%. There's some demand concern there after Saudi Arabia cut its prices for October oil, Matt.
Are we surprised, Danny, that Tesla didn't get a spot in the S&P 500? I mean, it's a $400 billion company.
Matt, this is something I feel like people always forget, that the S&P 500, it's decided by committee. It's not an automatic thing that once Tesla gets to a certain market cap that it's going to get added to the S&P 500. So I always sort of approached it with a bit of skepticism, though honestly I thought it had a good chance, but still it did not get included. Part of that might be over concerns of its profitability metric, but the run-up in Tesla prices had partially been because of the optimism it would get added to the blue chip gauge. So we have that sell-off over the past 3 days in the U.S. ended Friday. It does sell off post-market after we get that announcement and then comes back basically unchanged, Matt.
I mean, they make money, you know, they have profits, posted profits, and their trailing PE is only 897. So there's that. Danny Berger, thanks very much for a look at those markets. Up next, we talk U.S. politics.
It's such an interesting new world.
The world is changing.
For us, it's not about being first. It's about being the best.
While everyone is zigging, we're zagging.
We feel like we can maybe help people out more.
We have an enormous number of big ideas.
I do double down on helping other Black founders, whether it's fundraising, hiring, growth, product, whatever it is that they need.
Bloomberg Television is reinventing one of the most iconic brands in financial television for a new audience. Join me to see the news program for the clever investor. This is Bloomberg Wall Street Week.
Live from Berlin, I'm Matt Miller. This is Bloomberg Markets. We want to check in right now on the first word news, the top stories from the Bloomberg terminal. For that, we go to Leanne Gerrans. Leanne?
Thanks, Matt. Over in the US, Joe Biden holds a 10-point lead over President Donald Trump. That's according to a new poll from CBS News. The poll also found that 4 out of 10 Democrats say that Biden isn't campaigning enough. The top issue for voters is still the economy. That's followed by healthcare, the coronavirus outbreak, and recent protests. Now, authorities in Southern California have pinpointed the cause of a fire that has burned more than 7,000 acres. They say it was started by a pyrotechnic device used at a gender reveal party. The blaze is one of 23 major fires now burning in the state. In China, exports kept expanding in August. They rose 9.5% from a year earlier to the third highest level on record. Meanwhile, imports unexpectedly dropped down more than 2%, and China's trade surplus with the US was the highest since November 2018. And the European Union is warning British Prime Minister Boris Johnson against tearing up parts of the Brexit deal he did sign a year ago. Johnson has been ramping up his threats to leave the EU without a trade deal. He will tell the European Union today he's willing to walk away rather than compromise on what he sees as the core principles of leaving the bloc. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and at Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg. Matt.
Leanne, thanks very much. Leanne Gerrans there with your first word news. Now, Joe Biden in the latest CBS poll is leading President Donald Trump by 10 points. But the Trump campaign is pouring money into Minnesota, which is an historically Democratic state that he lost narrowly, but still lost nonetheless 4 years ago, because they're counting on public opposition to the Black Lives Matter protests and the violence surrounding those. Joining us to talk a little bit about the U.S. political situation is Thomas Gift, director of the UCL Center on U.S. Politics. Thomas, what do you think about this idea that the Trump campaign can, in a way, I don't want to misspeak, but in a way capitalize on the violence that's surrounding these protests and ride a gain in the polls?
Well, it's a great observation, Matt, and it's certainly no secret that Trump is trying to brand himself the law and order president. He thinks that a message can resonate with predominantly white voters in suburban districts. It's a strategy that many have likened to Richard Nixon in 1968. So the president wants to present himself as the only firewall between social unrest and violence on the one hand and safety and security on the other. One of the challenges for Trump, however, is that he's the president right now, and the social unrest that we see in the news and on social media is happening under his watch. So because he's the incumbent, it makes it a little bit harder for Trump to insist that he's somehow the unique remedy for some of these problems that have afflicted.
Okay, I'm placing a stop on profit for euro at 118.20.4. Okay, stop. Sorry, 122.4. Stop on profit at 118.22.4.
Of police and firemen. He drives a Corvette, and he picked Kamala Harris as his running mate. She's about as law and order as it gets.
Exactly. And so I think that this accusation that Trump is levying against Joe Biden is a much tougher sell than if he was running against another candidate, someone who is more progressive. I mean, it's certainly the case that Trump is trying to brand Biden as either wittingly or unwittingly captive to the far left elements of the Democratic Party, those who would want to support, for example, defunding the police. But Joe Biden has come out fairly strongly, and just recently, for example, last week in Pittsburgh, making it very clear that he supports the police, he supports the work that they're doing, and that really what he's trying to do is, you know, ensure there is accountability when some of these events happen. But yeah, it's a much harder sell, I think, against Biden than it would be with some other candidates.
What kind of, I mean, the coronavirus, as you said, is a big issue as well for voters right now. And I'm guessing that the split on these polls is pretty much the split as well of people who want to wear masks in the U.S. What kind of success can Donald Trump run on in terms of fighting this virus?
Well, he doesn't have too much of a record to run on right now. And if you just look at the polls, most Americans are quite skeptical of the job that he has done with managing the pandemic. I mean, he has talked a lot recently about the possibility of an imminent vaccine. If he could announce something like that, then I do think it would reshape the election in a not insignificant way. That's assuming, of course, that it's verifiable, that there aren't questions about the timing of the announcement happening at the 11th hour. But most importantly, I think that would shift the conversation, rightly or wrongly, away from some of Trump's perceived mishandling of the pandemic. That doesn't mean that it would totally minimize the complaints that many voters have about how Trump has managed the public health crisis, but it would change the narrative to make it more forward-looking rather than backward-looking. And Trump would certainly use that as an opportunity to remind voters about the state of the economy before the coronavirus. And that case would probably be bolstered by the fact that any announcement of a vaccine would provide a positive shock to Wall Street. Precisely, though, Matt, because any announcement would be seen as an unequivocal good for Trump's reelection bid, there would be questions about whether this is being politicized. So that's where officials would need to insist on guidance from public health experts about the state of the vaccine, its efficacy, and how quickly it could be unveiled and distributed.
By the way, Thomas, do you think Trump voters, keep their opinions closer to the vest when the pollsters come around? Because, right now Biden has we just showed a 10-point lead. I've seen as high as a 15-point lead in other polls. But the betting markets have them neck and neck, and sometimes even are putting Trump on top. Also, last election in 2016, we saw Clinton with this kind of lead. And then when it came to, obviously, the vote, Donald Trump won, at least in terms of the Electoral College. So is that going to happen again?
Well, Matt, one caveat about the 2016 polls is that they were much more accurate nationally than they were on a state-by-state basis. So most polls predicted that Clinton would win the popular vote in 2016, and they were right about that. So that's important to keep in mind. At the same time, there is a lot of hand-wringing about why the pollsters got it wrong, especially in these swing states, and whether that same error could happen again in 2020. So some of those issues are technical. They deal with, for example, how to predict the actual turnout of key demographics like citizens without a college degree. But part of the challenge this year is that the election is just happening against the backdrop of extremely rare and virtually unprecedented events. Coronavirus and the deliberate shuttering of large sections of the economy. And that's just going to invariably increase the uncertainty of the estimates of these models. Trump is also such an unconventional candidate and a polarizing candidate, as you note, that it's hard to build in, for example, whether there might be some of these so-called secret Trump voters, citizens who won't admit that they are supporting the president in surveys, but who will nevertheless turn out to vote for him on November 3rd. So that's a real issue, and it's hard for pollsters to encapsulate that into the models.
All right, Thomas, thanks so much for giving us a little bit of an update on this. Thomas Gift there, director of the UCL Center on U.S. Politics, talking to us about the impending election. Now, Argentina has to reduce its bond yields as it'll take time for the government to return to capital markets. The economy minister, Martin Guzman, told Alex Steele and Guy Johnson on the day the country concluded a $65 billion debt restructuring.
Certainly for us, it was a very important step in the process of stabilizing the economy to reach this deal with 99% of our creditors. The remaining 1%, we will continue working on it. It was most of a technical issue. There were some retail bondholders registered in Europe that did not get a chance to vote, but we don't see that as a problem. We will continue working to resolve what is left. 99%. We consider it as massive acceptance. So this is positive news for Argentina's economy.
Still in a very difficult place, though, Minister Guzman. We are going to see bonds retrading. I'm wondering at what level you expect them to be trading and what kind of signal that we can take away from that. The new bonds are going to start trading next week. What yield are you hoping for?
Well, that's a matter mostly for bondholders. We know that stabilizing the economy is a process. It cannot be done from one day to another. Argentina was already suffering a deep macroeconomic crisis when COVID-19 hits. The country has been in a crisis since 2018. And we hope our investors' expectations become more positive day by day. But again, this will take time and it will be a process. We expect at the beginning to have relatively higher yields than in a few months from today.
So, I mean, the yield question is important, though, because you need a high enough yield to attract international investors and foreign capital, but not a high enough yield where that's going to hurt you down the line. Some analysts are looking at 12%. What's the one that you can manage that kind of does both?
Well, again, at 12%, that will represent the cost of credit that for Argentina will not be sustainable. But the good part of this deal is that Argentina will not need, the government will not need to access international credit markets for a while. So 12% from the viewpoint of the government, of course, is a high yield for the prospects of accessing international credit markets. It should be much lower than that, but we are aware that that will take time. Our investors were aware also that that was going to take time, and that's why they came to achieve a deal in which there will be no capital amortization payments for the first 5 years. So we need to work on consistent macroeconomic management to decrease that yield to levels that we consider acceptable, and again, that will take time.
Minister Guzman, going forward, clearly there's going to have to be a conversation with the IMF. When do formal talks start with the IMF? And what kind of deal are you looking for? Is it a standby arrangement? Are you looking for an extended fund facility? What is your objective?
Well, the first objective is a program that works, one that helps Argentina to stabilize the economy. All modalities are on the table. SBA, EFF, we haven't discussed those yet. We didn't clarify when we requested the program what the modality would be. But again, what is of the essence here is that the program is based on different premises for macroeconomic management and macroeconomic policies than the package of contractionary fiscal policy and contractionary monetary policy on which the SBA in 2018 was based. In the context of a recession, that program deepened the recession. Now we're moving forward to a different kind of program. We've been having a very constructive engagement with the IMF, and of course, this is going to be a complex process. It will take time. The program has to have legitimacy in the society. We announced already that we will send the program to the National Congress to be approved before we have the final deal.
And still ahead, Italy's finance minister tells Bloomberg the economy will rebound faster than had previously been anticipated. We'll bring you more from our exclusive interview next. And right now we're looking at gains across European equity indexes, including the index in Italy, the FTSE MIB that trades in Milan. It's up 1.6%. The DAX and the CAC up 1.75%, and the FTSE gaining 2% after they all slumped on Thursday and Friday. This is Bloomberg.
It's really a reminder, isn't it, just how sensitive the markets are to any commentary about trade. We did see some pressure on the yuan, we did see some pressure on the futures. That is now being reversed.
The Boston Symphony Orchestra presents BSO at Home. While you stay inside, enjoy a curated collection of archived concerts and behind-the-scenes stories from BSO musicians. BSO Homeschool provides lessons for music lovers of all ages. New performances and messages from musicians are added regularly. Enjoy these selections and much more at bso.org/at-home. The Boston Symphony Orchestra presents BSO at Home, a collection of concerts, at-home lessons, and behind-the-scenes stories to enjoy while you stay at home. Learn more at bso.org/at-home.
It's time for the Bloomberg Business Flash, a look at some of the biggest business stories in the news right now. I'm Leanne Gerrans. It's a sign the world's largest oil exporter sees demand for fuel wavering. Saudi Arabia cut pricing for sales in October. The state-owned oil company Saudi Aramco reduced key Arab light grade by more than expected for Asian customers. U.S. oil buyers will also now get a break. China plans to cap the interest rate that Ant Group can charge borrowers on quick consumer loans. That's a move that could curb the financial tech giant's biggest revenue driver. Bloomberg has learned that China's likely to make the highest rate 15.4%. Ant is preparing for what could be a record-setting IPO. And China's Semiconductor Manufacturing International fell the most in 7 weeks. There's a report from Reuters that the Trump administration may add the chip maker to a blacklist. Shares of SMIC plunged as much as 21% in Hong Kong. Putting the company on a blacklist would force American suppliers to seek a special license before shipping it. And that's your business flash. Matt.
Leanne, thanks very much. Leanne Gerrans there with your business flash. Now, after suffering one of Europe's toughest lockdowns, Italy's economy will rebound faster than had been anticipated in the third quarter. That's according to the finance minister, Roberto Gualtieri. He spoke exclusively with Bloomberg's John Flynn at the Ambrosetti Forum in Cernobbio.
The measures we have taken so far has been decisive in containing the economic impact of the crisis and preserving our productive capacity and jobs. But the recovery and resilience plan will be oriented to the future, to the transformation of the Italian economy on the line of innovation, sustainability, and social and territorial cohesion. So we will focus the plan on investment, and investment aimed at enhancing our growth potential. So it would be investment in innovation like ultra broadband, cloud, supercomputing, European project of common interest like hydrogen, batteries, microelectronics. We would support the private sector to invest more in innovation and to support the process of reduction of carbon emissions. We would boost our infrastructure equipment, the immaterial infrastructure like broadband, but also material infrastructure, in particular in the south. And we will invest a lot in human capital, education, research.
Minister, Italian debt is a big concern for investors and foreign markets. You mentioned in your speech at the Ambrosetti Forum a new mechanism to reduce the debt-GDP ratio in a solid and sustainable way. Could you give us some details on how much you think it could lead to as a reduction?
We will present at the end of September our fiscal document, which will have not only a 3-year horizon, but also a longer-term horizon, where we will define a trajectory of reduction of our debt-GDP ratio that would be significant and sustainable. We have the opportunity to do that via medium-term fiscal measures, and also thanks to the impact on growth and growth potential of the productive investment that we will deploy with our Next Generation EU plan.
Your government has mentioned an 8% estimate for GDP contraction this year. Now, what do you think the true number will be? 8, between 8 and 10?
The 8% contraction forecast was a forecast done mid-April. As we said already, it will be revised downward. But contrary to other forecasts that have predicted a very significant decrease of GDP, two figures, thanks to the positive rebound that we are seeing for the third trimester, our downward revision will be limited, and we expect a one-figure reduction of GDP for 2020.
And for next year, for GDP?
Next year, we will have a positive increase. We have not yet defined our forecast. You will see soon. And I think that in 2022, we will be able to arrive to our pre-crisis GDP level.
Right. Now, Italy's public finances have obviously taken a hit with COVID and with the national lockdown, one of the strictest in Europe. To what extent are Italy's public finances sustainable only because of the current support from the European Central Bank?
Monetary policy of ECB, of course, is extremely positive, but it has to be taken into account also the strong fundamentals of Italian economy, that make our debt fully sustainable. I have to say also that we are seeing, even in this difficult moment of the crisis, for many months, since this government entered into force, also a very positive trend of fiscal revenue. As you know, we had a very significant downward revision of our deficit for 2019, and one of the factors that are making us improve our forecast for GDP is also the recent data on fiscal revenue, tax revenue, which are positive. So we have a number of elements which make us in the condition to define a trajectory which will further improve the sustainability of our public debt.
And that was the finance minister of Italy, Roberto Gualtieri, talking with John Filane. Now, the ECB's towering presence in the bond markets and the absence of any explicit currency targeting shifting the spotlight to the euro ahead of Thursday's meeting. Bloomberg's Danny Berger joins us with more. And of course, Danny, central bankers don't typically like to give any indication that they're trying to push a currency around. And they may not even care that much if it moves very slowly, right?
That's certainly right. Hearing from Philip Lane from the ECB that the euro's strength was a concern for especially a lot of the exporting countries really was, companies rather, really was somewhat of a surprising and one of the first indications that the central bank does care a lot about the strength of the euro. But Matt, they're really unlikely to address it at their meeting Thursday. One of the messages we're likely to hear is just that the risks to the downside have really begun to pile up. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to adjust policy. All indications are that they won't. There's not enough data that yet to support that. But last time we heard from Christine Lagarde was in July. She was cautiously optimistic. This time around, there's more coronavirus cases. The recovery has somewhat slowed down. So we're likely to hear more pessimism, setting the stage for cutting before the end of this year, Matt.
All right, Danny, thanks very much. Danny Berger there talking to us a little bit about what to expect. On Thursday, we'll broadcast that, of course, for you as it happens. Coming up, more on Bloomberg Markets with Chris Bailey.
Some things you see coming, some things you don't. The trick is to be ready for anything. Pablo from Infrastructure Support is working every day to keep essential market data flowing seamlessly. We keep on, so you can keep on.
This is a step in the right direction. Perhaps it's a harbinger for more changes in the future, like the completion of the banking union.
Does, as you say, have some catching up to do on that front. So we are expecting to see a little bit of strength coming through at the start of trade. How long will it last, though? The perennial question.
3 p.m. in London, I'm Guy Johnson. Welcome to Bloomberg Markets. It's Labor Day in the United States, as a result of which markets a little quieter than normal. Let me just give you an idea of where we are here in Europe and around the world. The Stock 600 is significantly higher today. We are seeing a very positive session developing here in Europe. Will that be a positive tailwind for the United States tomorrow? We will wait and see, but at the moment, it looks like we are going to see a negative open, certainly for the NASDAQ. Autos are leading. Just about every single sector is in positive territory. I've got 543 stocks higher on the Stock 600. In terms of what else we are watching, the pound is lower. Just keep that in mind during our next conversation. We are repricing risk around Brexit. I forgot to mention as well, the Chinese session, very negative towards the end, and it was big tech that was where we saw the selling, and that is maybe not a great tailwind for the US session tomorrow. And we also see weakness today in the Russian ruble. This as Angela Merkel puts Nord Stream 2 firmly in the firing line as a result of the Alexei Navalny poisoning. We'll talk again more about that a little bit later. But let's get back and talk more about what is happening in the UK. The UK is stepping up preparations, if I can say that. Obviously, I haven't talked for a long time, for Brexit trade talks to fail, and is planning a new round of legislation that could over.
Position closed on euro, as you can see right over here. Yeah. We have profit £200.
Holding us back, but we can't accept that the EU will control our laws. That's the reason we're leaving. No other country goes into free trade negotiations with the EU or with anyone else on that basis.
Boris Johnson picking out a note a little bit earlier on, an email suggesting that basically mid-October is the key deadline now for getting talks done. If we don't see a deal by then, we'll walk away and get on with it. Joining us now, Bloomberg's Brexit reporter, Joe Mays. Joe, is Boris Johnson happy? Is he okay with what is happening here? Is he actually on board with the idea that the UK could be heading for, let's call it, an Australia-style arrangement with the EU?
I think what we're seeing here is some real brinkmanship now. We're really at the crunch moment of these talks. There's hardly any time left at all to get something done. And now Boris Johnson is coming out and saying in the strongest terms possible that he would be happy with no trade deal with the EU, and whether that's kind of leverage tactic to try and make the EU make some concessions, whether that's actually, it is hard to say. I'm more of the view that he is genuinely happy with that scenario because it gives the UK all the freedoms he's talked about as benefits of Brexit, it being out of the single market, out of the customs union, making free trade deals around the world, and full